7 medieval inventions that kept peasants alive and fortied while modern tech fails. During the 2009 Hessentag Festival in Germany, a team of engineers decided to test something everyone assumed had nothing left but archaeological value: a Bronze Age wall segment reconstructed using 3,400-year-old techniques. They expected it to be nothing more than a demonstration of how primitive ancient people were, but the results left the entire team staring at each other in silence. The U-factor reading showed that the wall's insulation performance matched Germany's 1995 building standards, a golden benchmark in modern construction. The bigger shock came from the comparison. Between the Bronze Age and 1995, humanity's insulation efficiency had dropped by 4 to 6 times. It wasn't that we forgot, it was that we regressed. For thousands of years, our buildings became prettier, materials more expensive and complex. Yet their ability to hold heat, the one thing that determines survival in winter, collapsed faster than anyone could believe. It's almost ironic that an ancient community with no electricity, no machines, no thermal science could achieve something we only rediscovered after millennia of research. And that was just the first revelation. If this surprised you, think about this. How many ancient techniques have we abandoned that still outperform modern standards? What do you think the next discovery will be? Leave a comment before we move on to idea number 2. Try placing yourself in January of 1320, when the cold didn't just fall from the sky, but clung to everything like an invisible predator patiently waiting for its moment. The temperature outside is 40 degrees, the wind scraping across the open fields sounds like metal dragging on stone, yet inside a medieval earth-walled hut, breath is still warm, hands can still move, and children sleep peacefully under thick layers of wool. No heaters, no electricity, no automatic climate control. Only time-tested techniques that they trusted as surely as they trusted the arrival of spring. Now jump to the present. Cut the power in your home for just 24 hours in the same kind of cold. Water pipes begin cracking from the inside out. Brick walls turn so cold they bead with moisture. Paint seems to shrink, and every breath you exhale becomes a white cloud right in your living room. Just one night, and a modern house, with all the insulation technology we pride ourselves on, turns into an icebox slowly squeezing the life out of everything inside. That contrast forces a question with no easy answer. How did a poor medieval farmer, surrounded by a brutal winter, manage to survive better than we do in the worst-case scenario? If you ever thought modern meant safe, the next idea may make you think twice. In medieval manuscripts, people often mentioned a kind of strange furnace that only needed to be fired once to stay warm for many days. For centuries, historians assumed it was just folkloric exaggeration, until archaeologists excavated the foundations of an old monastery in the Baltic region and uncovered something that forced them to rethink everything: a fully intact hypercaust. Unlike the Roman hypocaust, which needed constant fire to function, the medieval hypercaust operated on a completely different principle, one that modern engineers didn't accurately replicate until the 20th century. They didn't try to keep the flames alive as long as possible. They did the opposite. Burn the fire as hard, as fast, and as hot as they could. The fire lasted only a few hours, but in that short span, it heated hundreds of pounds of granite stones to over 500 degrees.
All right, hold it there.
Those stones, chosen specifically for their unique crystal structure, absorbed heat like a giant thermal battery. When the flames died, when the ashes were cleared, when the smoke vents were closed, The room above suddenly became a warm living space for 3, 4, even 5 straight days without a single extra stick of wood. The twist is this. When researchers recalculated the wood consumption, they found that medieval households burned, on average, only about 36 minutes of fire per day, nearly 90% less than our modern heating systems. In other words, a poor farmer living in a structure of earth and stone was using heat storage technology so efficient that industrial society had to relearn it from scratch. If this discovery surprised you, try guessing. What else might be hidden inside the hypercost system that the old records never fully revealed? Leave your thoughts before we move on to idea number 4. When the Romans built the hypocaust, they believed the key to staying warm was heating the floor and letting the warmth slowly radiate outward. But medieval people in the northern lands, where the cold cuts skin rather than merely stings, accidentally discovered a principle far more effective: forced convection. Something modern engineers needed hundreds of years to fully analyze. In the hypercaust, they didn't just heat the floor. They created an entire air-moving machine hidden beneath it. When the granite stones were heated to a glowing red and the fire had died, the heat from the stones didn't stay still. It rose through small vents that remained sealed during firing and were only opened once the system switched into its heat storage phase. The massive temperature difference between the hot stone chamber below and the cold room above pulled air upward with force, creating a natural but incredibly powerful convection current. The warmth didn't seep up from the floor, like in the Roman hypocaust. It surged upward and flooded the room like an invisible wave. The astonishing part is that this mechanism is nearly identical to a modern HVAC system, with one major difference. The hypercaust used no electricity, no fans, no moving parts at all. Everything worked through the clever way ancient builders arranged stones, bricks, and airflow. That's why, although many old records claimed Roman techniques were lost, researchers today must admit, not only were they not lost, but medieval builders actually improved them far beyond their predecessors. When the Romans built the hypocaust, they based the entire system on radiant heat. Warm the floor, let the floor radiate, and hope the warmth would slowly spread like a weak winter sun. But for medieval people in the northern lands, where 30 degrees wasn't a disaster but a yearly visitor, that principle was too slow, too gentle. They needed something more aggressive, and that's how the hypercaust emerged. Not just heating, but forcing hot air to circulate through the house like blood moving through a body. When the fire was done and the pile of glowing granite stones sat inside the chamber, they opened the small vents in the floor, tiny openings placed precisely like conduits. The temperature difference created an invisible push, sending hot air shooting upward, rising, curling along the walls, then spreading across the entire room the way a heart pumps blood through every limb. Reconstructed accounts describe an almost surreal sensation. Standing directly over one of those currents, you could feel the heat lifting gently against your body, as if the floor itself were breathing. The surprising part is that this mechanism works like a modern forced convection system, but without fans, without electricity, without a single mechanical part, just the way ancient builders controlled airflow using stone, earth, and empty space. That's why instead of calling the hypercaust an improved Roman furnace, many researchers today say openly, this is the upgraded version Rome never achieved. It wasn't the 21st century that made people obsessed with the idea of self-heating materials. The irony is that while modern laboratories keep failing with all kinds of synthetic fibers, even the poorest medieval farmer was already wearing a fabric that had exactly that ability. Wool filled with raw lanolin. Fresh off the sheep's back, that fleece was thick, greasy, and carried a distinct smell. The very qualities factories today scrub away to create a cleaner, prettier wool. But the lanolin was the secret. It formed a natural waterproof barrier, making snow and rain bead off instead of soaking in. It let wool absorb up to 30% of its weight in moisture, while still feeling warm and dry against the skin. And the strangest part, when wool fibers absorb moisture, their protein structure triggers a heat-releasing reaction, giving off energy like a tiny furnace right on the wearer's body. While wet cotton drains heat and kills a person in minutes, medieval raw wool becomes warmer when wet, a paradox that forces modern material scientists to reconsider entire theories. Thanks to that, a farmer could stand outside in falling snow all day, clothes heavy but body heat intact. The most striking detail? The thing we now sell at a premium as high-end outdoor gear was, to them, just everyday clothing, the only barrier between their bodies and the white death of winter. In regions where snow covered the ground all winter and 30 degrees winds could strike your face like a steel whip, medieval people lived behind walls we now call by a very gentle name, wattle and daub. But behind that rustic label was a secret modern engineers only rediscovered by accident during experiments in 2009. Dual-layer insulation technology existed more than 3 millennia ago, and it was far more sophisticated than anyone expected. They built 2 parallel woven wattle layers, each coated with a mixture of clay, straw, and manure, a blend with a unique balance of compression and breathability. But it was the space between those layers that forced archaeologists to rethink everything. A cavity tightly packed with compressed hay, a material we assume is cheap and primitive, yet it behaved like a thermal labyrinth. Hay wasn't just hay. It created countless tiny air pockets, each so small that wind couldn't move through them, while warmth became trapped as if locked inside a maze. When storms slammed into the outer wall, the cold was stopped at that layer of motionless air, and inside the home, a strange kind of warmth remained. Not hot, but stable enough that frost couldn't form and wood couldn't freeze. The unsettling part is that for thousands of years we labeled this as primitive construction, even though its performance matches, or surpasses, many industrial materials today. Are we underestimating the intelligence of our ancestors, or have we simply forgotten what actually works? What do you think about this buried technology? Leave your thoughts before we move on to the next idea. When winter in northern Europe locked the land under a layer of ice as hard as a whetstone, medieval farmers understood that the forest wasn't something they could rely on forever. Wood was precious, scarce, owned by the Lord, and a single over-harvested season could leave an entire village without fuel.
It's getting colder down here.
So they turned to something modern people rarely consider: burning the earth itself to survive. On foggy mornings, white and thick as milk, they walked into the bogs and used long cutting blades to slice out blocks of peat, those soft coal bricks formed from dead vegetation compressed over thousands of years. Freshly cut, peat was wet, heavy, smelling of soil and moss. But after weeks of drying in the northern wind, it became a slow-burning, long-lasting, cleaner fuel than young coal. The most fascinating part is that in many regions, peat wasn't just a backup, It was once a national fuel, powerful enough that in the 17th century, the Netherlands built its entire maritime economy on it, reserving wood for shipbuilding and heating millions of households with peat instead. For medieval farmers, a cart of dry peat meant a less terrifying winter. For modern historians, peat is the answer to a paradox: how a resource-poor society still had enough heat to survive endless, brutal winters. What do you think? If a nationwide blackout happened one day, could peat, the soft fuel beneath our feet, return as a lifesaver? On 40 the last nights, when the ground split into white lines like exposed bone, everything above the soil froze solid. Wells turned into pillars of ice, meat hanging outside hardened like stone, and every breath fell as if made of glass smoke. Yet with just a few creaking wooden steps leading underground, you'd find the exact opposite. A steady 2 degrees C, cool enough, damp enough, dark enough to keep vegetables as fresh as the day they were harvested. This was the root cellar, the natural refrigerator medieval people built using nothing but stone, earth, wood, and the survival instincts of those who had no one to rely on but themselves. While the house above trembled in the storm, the storage chamber below remained an entirely different world. Stone walls exhaled a gentle chill. Potatoes never shriveled. Carrots stayed crisp. Cabbage slept through the long months. And here's the twist that startles many modern people. After a 7-day blackout, even the newest refrigerator gives up. But a 700-year-old root cellar keeps working flawlessly without a single second of electricity. Medieval people weren't chasing technology. They relied on the physics of the earth, depth, humidity, darkness, rules that never betrayed them. What do you think? In an age completely dependent on electricity, are we forgetting the simplest yet most reliable technology our ancestors ever created? When you stand in a northern forest where the wind screeches through the pine trunks like metal scraping against metal, you understand why medieval people never saw a log cabin as a temporary wooden shelter. On a 35-degree night, wind tears through the needles and lashes the treetops with blows so cold they numb your skin in seconds. But the moment you step inside an old cabin, you find something almost illogical. Warm as a furnace, not a single draft slipping through. The round logs, 8 to 12 inches thick, were notched and locked together using a technique carpenters today still consider master level. The colder it gets, the more the wood contracts and tightens itself, turning the whole structure into a single gapless block. Then they packed moss, clay, and flax fibers into every seam, simple materials that created an airtight seal so effective that modern tests show medieval log cabins are often less drafty than 2025 houses made with industrial materials. Outside, the blizzard screams like it's trying to tear the forest apart. Inside, a single small fire keeps the place warm through the night, thanks to the massive amount of heat thick logs absorb and slowly release. That wasn't luck. It was the survival engineering of people who understood winter wasn't weather, but a real predator. And this impossible air tightness has made more than a few experts ask, how did a house built with axes, wooden joints, and human strength outperform modern standards? Do you think we've lost something on our road to progress? Share your thoughts before we move on to the next idea.
So where do you think he is?
There's one detail most of us get completely wrong. Medieval people warmed their homes with crude open fires, smoke drifting through thatched roofs, everything smelling like soot. But if you stepped into a North European home in the 15th century at the exact moment they lit their fire, you would see something entirely different. a system so sophisticated that many modern engineers now admit medieval people didn't live beside fire. They controlled it. The hook is right here. A fire that burned for only 2 to 3 hours could keep the entire house warm for more than 24 hours, and they did it with no electricity, no fans, no technology. The secret was the masonry stove, a massive block of stone, brick, or ceramic weighing hundreds of kilos with deep, twisting internal channels. When the fire burned, the flames weren't allowed to shoot straight up the chimney. They were forced through meters of narrow passages, transferring their heat into every slab of thick stone. When you closed the damper, all that heat became trapped inside the thermal mass and slowly radiated outward like an underground sun. Around the stove, they built sleeping benches, low beds, even wall niches to capture every bit of warmth. What shocks many modern people is the efficiency. The masonry stove absorbed nearly all the heat into the stone instead of wasting it up the chimney the way fancy 19th century European fireplaces did. While modern houses need heaters running all night, medieval families needed just a few bundles of wood, a single firing, and let the stone do the rest. When you look at this level of refinement, you start to wonder, have we chased convenience so far that we forgot the wisdom our ancestors already mastered? If you think this system is incredible, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to explore the ancient techniques making a comeback in our unstable modern world.